In his 1975 book, The God of the Oppressed, the theologian James Cone asked the question, who is Jesus Christ for us today? Now, for James Cone, the old theological conceptions were not adequate to answer that question. Instead, he claimed that our interest in Jesus must arise from our encounter with his presence in our contemporary existence. Well, then Cone told the story of his own encounter with the Christ. It occurred at the Macedonia AME Church in Bearden, Arkansas, on Sunday mornings, when Sister Ora Wallace would stand and line a familiar hymn, and then the rest of the congregation would stand and join her in singing and shouting praises of Amen and Alleluia. And some would clap their hands, and some would tap their feet, and at least one person would be down on their knees swaying with the music. It was here in these moments that Jesus was present. Cone was one of the founders of the School of Black Theology. He argued that theology which does not find solidarity with the poor and oppressed is not Christian theology. And for that very reason, he was highly critical of the theological tradition for long ignoring those issues. Cone encountered Christ as present in the contemporary world in the lives of black people in their hopes and dreams for freedom. He wrote powerfully that Jesus Christ is not a proposition, not a theological concept, which exists merely in our heads. He is an event of liberation, a happening in the lives of oppressed people struggling for political freedom. Well, other contemporary voices have said similar things about Jesus. For instance, womanist theology, which is a school of thought developed by African American women, further these ideas. Kelly Brown Douglas wrote that African American women confess Jesus as Christ because of what he did during his time as well as in their own lives. They did not make this confession because of his metaphysical makeup. Dolores Williams wrote that Jesus is whoever Jesus has to be to function in a supportive way in the struggle. The African feminist theologian Mercy Amba Odeobi wrote that for African women, discussion of Jesus is not a discourse, but a relationship between Jesus and women that leads them to discover for themselves that Jesus reveals God. And this is echoed in North American feminism. For instance, theologian Lisa Isherwood writes that the lived reality of the lives of women and men is the starting point in discussing Jesus and his relevance for us today. So there's strong opinion in much contemporary writing about Jesus that how we think of him and how we approach him must arise from our own particular circumstances. And so because of that, right now there are lots of rich theology being written by people from multiple different perspectives: Aboriginal, Korean, disabled, queer. The question, who is Jesus Christ for us today, remains a live question. And it's one that I actually encounter all the time in my ministry. Most recently at the General Synod of the United Church of Christ, when one of my colleagues in ministry came to me and said, I want to talk to you about Jesus. She said that for her, as a woman and as a feminist, she just didn't relate to a first century itinerant Jewish rabbi peasant preacher who was a man. Now she said she related to the Christ, who she thinks has both feminine and masculine aspects, but Jesus just didn't do a lot for her. So, over hamburger, she and I and three others had a lively conversation about who Jesus is to us. Earlier this spring, I was at a party here in Oklahoma, and a woman who was a former minister's wife told me that she was done with Jesus. She said, I know most people give up God before they give up Jesus because they like what Jesus says and does. She said, but I know I'm kind of odd the other way around. I'm okay with God, I'm just tired of Jesus. Why should I center my life on him? And in recent years, if you've ever attended an ecclesiastical Council of the Oklahoma Association, as we are ordaining a new candidate for ministry, every time the most controversial question is asked of the candidate, do you believe that Jesus is God? And the person asking the question is never satisfied with the answer given, because of course they're looking for some particular answer and trying to trip the person up. By the way, if you're curious how I would answer that question, I have no clear concept of the divine apart from God, apart from Jesus. Someone asked me what does divinity look like, I would point to Jesus. So I'm not sure what the questioner is asking. What concept of God are they asking about? Are they interested in some sort of metaphysical question? Because even though I'm a philosopher and wrote a PhD dissertation in metaphysics, when it comes to Jesus, the metaphysical questions are of no interest to me. I think that is Jesus God is not a proper question. The interesting question would be, is Jesus Yahweh? And to that, I would give an unqualified yes. Of course, someone might then ask me, who is this Jesus that I think does reveal God? Am I talking about the Jesus contained within the canonical gospel stories, or the Jesus revealed in those stories which didn't make it into the canon? Am I speaking about the actual human being, who of course might be different from the character in the Gospels? Or am I talking about who the people who originally encountered that human being understood and experienced him to be? Or who Jesus has become after 2,000 years of development and thinking? Or is Jesus an experience in my own spirituality and my practices? So who is Jesus Christ today for you, Scott Jones? And it's interesting how lively these questions remain, and that for our faith, even some of the most fundamental issues are not clear here 21 centuries later. So what light then might our readings tonight cast upon this topic? Well, let's begin with this powerful passage from Ephesians 2. Here Jesus Christ is presented as the cornerstone of the household of God, the peacemaker of human divisions, the creator of a new humanity. Those are pretty promising images. The particular context here is the separation between Jews and Gentiles. Well, according to the ancient covenant with Israel, God had chosen for them to be the agents of salvation for the world, that through their faithfulness, blessing would radiate out into all of the creation. Now, St. Paul believed that it was Jesus who had fulfilled the covenant on the part of Israel, and for that reason, Jesus was the Christ, the long-awaited Messiah. Because Jesus had been faithful at fulfilling Israel's side of the covenant, now blessing was going to pour out upon all of creation, and God's Spirit would enter equally into Jew and Gentile, male and female, slave and free. Well, so the author of Ephesians picks up these ideas, begins to develop them, paying particular attention to the divisions between Jews and Gentiles. These were racial, ethnic, cultural divisions. And so Jesus, according to Ephesians, has broken down the dividing wall. That is the hostility between us. Now, it's no surprise that this passage has been used to speak about human divisions other than those for which it was originally intended. The author may not have conceived of Christianity as healing all the racial and cultural divisions of humankind, but that's how this chapter has been applied. The house